Well, it's that time of year again, 2022, Rye Whiskey of the Year. How are these all going to shake out? Only one way to find out. Let's do this. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much. Today we're talking again, like I said before, 2022 Rye Whiskey of the Year. So ultimately, these are 5 rye whiskeys that I tried to narrow down as best as I could. This was a year for me where I had a lot of really great rye whiskeys, whether they were finished or not. All of these will be kind of combined into that, so it won't necessarily be just all straight rye whiskeys. Some of these may have a finish to them. So here we are with my number 5 rye whiskey of the year from Pursuit United. This was a whiskey that was a very, very late entry for me into my top rye whiskeys that I had tried this year. As you can see, I don't even have a bottle. This was a sample that was sent to me from Pursuit United to do a review of. What exactly is this? So this is their rye, this is their straight rye whiskey that's blends of several different mash bills from 3 states. These are all rye whiskeys that are then finished in a sherry French Reserve oak that brought us to what this beautiful blend ultimately was. Heavy jammy notes, those pastry kind of notes. The sherry influence on this for me was perfect. I think the blend of it being both sherry and a French oak was something that made or allowed this rye whiskey to be that unique. When I first tried it, I was absolutely amazed, blown away by what it was that this rye whiskey really had to offer. So again, for me, like I mentioned before, this was a very late entry for me into my 2022 rye whiskeys of the year. And there you go, from Pursuit United. Again, this is the Sherry Finished Reserve Oak Straight Rye Whiskey. Coming in at number 4 is Barrel King Heavy Char. This was something that Jared did at Barrel King, where he then took that MGP straight rye whiskey, then put it into a heavy, heavy charred barrel, let this thing age for an undisclosed amount of time to ultimately come up with this rye that's finished again in a heavy charred oak barrel. What it did by offering up those heavy kind of oak, sweet oak, I'll say, without it being overdone, beautiful chocolate, espresso notes, slight pastry notes. You still got the backbone of that mintiness from the MGP rye, but what it was that he did with this heavy charred rye, I'll say this. I was able to try a sample of, and again, we're talking about something slightly different, but the Parker's this year, that was a heavy char. It reminded me of that just in the overall complexity, not necessarily trying to compare the two, but what that heavy char can do if it's done properly. And again, I think what it was that Jared at Barrel King did to this rye whiskey, making or turning this into a heavy char finish, was done beautifully. So again, they are a subscription-based program. So if there's anything that you're looking to purchase, it's all going to have to be done directly through Barrel King. I'll have a link in the description below to that. But my number 4 rye whiskey of the year is the Barrel King Rye Whiskey Heavy Char. So my number 3 rye whiskey of the year is Old Bones 10-year straight rye whiskey. So again, we're talking about more MGP. This, again, through Backbone Bourbon Company. This is a different label that they have that they call Old Bones. This is something that they keep exclusively for their overaged whiskeys. This being for the 2022 release of their 10-year straight rye whiskey, Old Bones. When I was first able to try this, I was blown away by the overall complexity and balance. This, again, had a lot of those traditional rye whiskey notes that we're all pretty familiar with through MGP. Just what I thought really amped this up was the balance and complexity of this. So you had a lot of those beautiful mint, orange, chocolate, beautiful baking spices. So for me, this was a whiskey this year that met or exceeded every expectation I was hoping for it. I had heard something about this about halfway through the year. Finally, in around November-ish, they released this. And when I had the opportunity to get it and try it, I knew immediately what this was offering. Right after trying it, was going to be one of my rye whiskeys of the year. It was beautifully balanced. The flavor profile of it hit everything that I appreciate in a rye whiskey. This just so happened to be aged 10 years. There you have it, my number 3 rye whiskey of the year, Old Bones 10-year straight rye whiskey from Backbone Bourbon Company. What do we have coming in at number 2? Well, here they are again, Sagamore Spirits out of Baltimore, Maryland. This just so happened to be their PX sherried finished rye whiskey. This is a brand for me that for some reason still continues to get slept on a little bit. And I think this rye whiskey is a perfect representation of what it is that Sagamore Spirits is doing overall. The attention to detail and what it was that they allowed this PX sherried rye whiskey to do and develop is absolutely incredible. For me, this was a very tough between 1 and 2 as to how I was going to place these two. But what it was that Sagamore did, again, with this PX sherry, offering up those jammy notes, the heavy baking spices, it just had everything that I think you would really want or look for in a sherry finished rye whiskey. The balance of this was done perfectly. I wouldn't change anything about this whiskey. For me, this was something that I felt was very, very enjoyable in that kind of fall, winter time frame, only because of everything it had to offer. You know, this has, in terms of proof, at 106 proof, the PX sherry, the baking spice, the jammy kind of fruit notes, the perfect oak, was yet again just a perfect blended rye whiskey from Sagamore. So there you have it, my number 2 rye whiskey of the year, PX sherried rye finished whiskey from Sagamore Spirits. What can we possibly have that will top that? Coming in at my number 1 rye whiskey of the year is none other than from Foregate Whiskey Company again. This just happens to be their Port Perry Perry. So this is, again, a 95.5 rye from MGP that they then finish for upwards of about 30 days in Australian tawny port casks. This was a whiskey that is really difficult to describe outside of giving this whiskey to someone to try it, and then they fully will understand and appreciate the components of quality that went into this rye whiskey. So first starting out with aged MGP rye whiskey, then finishing it in quality Australian tawny port casks, allowed for this rye whiskey to ultimately shine above the rest. The balance of this between the fruity notes, those mints, the baking spice, the jammy fruity notes that again are on this, allowed for this to me be maybe one of the best whiskeys, not only that I've had in 2022, but maybe overall. I think for what they did with this blend, they have to be given an awful lot of credit for the attention to detail as to what whiskeys they're using, what finishing casks they're using, how long these whiskeys then sit in that secondary cask to ultimately create this blend, which is the Port Perry Perry. For me, hands down, my 2022 rye whiskey of the year. Again, if this is something that you still have the ability to find or get, there's maybe the possibility of this still being available in some areas, or depending on the handful of states that they're available in, you might be able to still find one or two of these on the shelves. If you are, consider yourself one of the lucky ones. I would not hesitate to pick up this rye whiskey whatsoever. So there you have it. For me, my 2022 Rye Whiskey of the Year goes to, once again, from Foregate Whiskey Company, their Port Perry Perry. So there you have it, my top 5 2022 Rye Whiskeys of the Year. All of these absolutely incredible rye whiskeys in their own right. If you're able to find any or all of these, I think you'll appreciate it as much, if not more than I did. So again, there you have it, my 2022 Rye Whiskeys of the Year. Guys, thank you so much. And remember, it's about the journey and not the destination. Cheers.